Καλησπέρα σε όλους.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start, I would like to give the floor. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yannis Stathas and thank him for his invitation to participate in the first conference on crime without punishment, Nazi crimes against humanity in Europe. Yannis, we're all ears. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is a special day. It is the last day of this conference, but it is quite important to us because we will have people speaking from Distomo, and we have a lot of young children attending the conference because we have Vargiro Kastreti, Vasiliki, Thanasis, and they give a struggle on their own all these years. And you, Niki, being from Distomo, you are the young generation who will actually take over after our generation for our struggle. With us, we have two people anti-fascist in the anti-fascist struggle. And we have Alexandra Santa, the father of whom took down the flag, the German flag, from the Acropolis, and Triandafiliar. Kostopoulou, an activist who fought in Germany mainly, where she helped develop collective memory there and communicated to people what Germans have done in the rest of Europe. Not Germans, of course, we talk about the Nazis. And she is the person who spoke loudly about what the Nazis did in various countries all these past years. So she raised awareness among people everywhere. And nowadays, we all understand that it is rather difficult. Some time ago, we had a Nazi organization being part of the parliament. So our obligation is not to forget. We need to remember our history, to convey it to the generations to come in order not to repeat all these unfortunate events. And now I think you have the floor now to share your points of view, and hopefully next year we will have this conference live in Distomo, and hopefully we will have the chance to meet in person.
Όπως προανέφερε και ο
Yannis mentioned earlier, it is quite important that people of our generation participate in this action. We are present and we are there to honor our area. I do remember my grandfather's narrative at the age of 15 back then, and a lot of our compatriots in Distomo do remember the narratives and stories of their ancestors. But I think that our obligation now is to remember the past. And Vasiliki Kastreti is our first speaker, international and European studies postgraduate degree holder. He will talk to us about the contemporary aspects of racism the European dimension. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank the municipality for inviting me to participate in this conference. And I would like to thank the municipality for the Museum of Nazi victims. The aim is to talk about if 81 years after the initiation of World War II and 77 years after the massacre of Distomo, we have these preliminary ideas like hostility, for example, that led to racism and massacre. I will talk about racism in Europe nowadays and how it is depicted in Greece and in Europe. And of course, I will talk about the EU actions against racism, and I will talk about the new contract about asylum and migration. I try to have an approach that does not diminish any other groups of people, but mainly focuses on immigrants, because that is what has affected the European being nowadays. Regarding society, we see an upgrade of racist speech, and things deteriorated further because of the crisis. After 2015, we see an increase of the conservative reactions combined with the increase of migration flows. And that is happening. This is hate speech, which is omnipresent on a daily basis, and that is how it is approached. Besides the daily behavior, we have the organized racist violence, as it was referred in reports for 2019. Even though the cases have reduced, in 2019 we had a lot of racist cases, around 50, that were executed from organized team against refugees and migrants. What is of paramount importance is, according to this report, the perpetrators are simple citizens, are just ordinary citizens, and a percentage of them are minors. I would like to remind at this point the public opinion before 2015 vis-a-vis the immigrants. They were rather positive, but after 2015, they started being negative because, of course, of the increased flows. In any case, nevertheless, we see that a lot of people are against something that does not meet their standards, and we have increased the incidence of discriminations. We see a lot of incidents of discrimination, but the perpetrators usually attack the victims, thinking that they won't be punished, and the victims perceive this attack as something that is expected to happen to them. The framework, of course, is deteriorated when we have the institutional racism depicted. It is expressed via the behavior of the ordinary citizens, but also of the state officials. A very recent example of social exclusion is that of citizenship, which says that the applicants for Greek citizenship should have revenues for 7 consecutive years in Greece without before applying for the citizens. So he or she should not be unemployed for 7 years in order to have the right to apply for citizenship. Something which is very difficult, knowing the financial conditions in Greece. At the European level, the incidents remain the same. Discrimination incidents and cases are quite high. As in the case of Greece, the Committee of Human Rights state that the victims, they are not to bring forward these attacks for the same reasons as in Greece. The existing processes for claims do not favor the victims. The pandemic operated in favor of racism, according to the reports of the European Commission against racism and the Organization of Human Rights. Discrimination and attacks against immigrants and refugees increased during this period of crisis. So 19 years after the equality rules, a lot of states have not conveyed in their law system the European legislation, even though all local legislation provide for anti-racism behaviors. Racist speech is a form of racist discrimination, which is considered less dangerous in comparison with other form of marginalization. Nevertheless, we need to be cautious and understand if this kind of racism includes other aspects because it influences the subconscious of people and actually interferes with the ideas of tolerance towards others. This silent acceptance of everyday racism, even though not proven, is linked to extremist attacks at the European level. And I will mention a problem, an attack here in Hanau, Germany, where a German killed 9 immigrants. In a letter found in his house, the perpetrator said that some people that cannot be hosted by Germany should be eliminated. It is quite interesting to see the extreme right party attacks against mayors in favor of migrants. In conclusion, regarding the social dimension of racism, repetitive incidents of discrimination and non-punishment of the perpetrators lead to the conclusion that racism is acceptable in the society as behaviors that introduce discriminations are included in various institutions, and the impediments imposed on people because of their race, origin, etc., give us the idea that a lot of racist approaches tend to become acceptable in the society. And in order to fight that, we have to rearrange the representation of people in the parliament. Quite recently, we have seen the introduction of extreme right wing entering the parliament, especially around the 1950s, but in the latest elections, even though the big party for Germany remains the third party, we see that its percentages have fallen. And this trend tends to be the rule around Europe lately. Nevertheless, we see in the regional elections of certain countries, like in Spain, some extreme right parties take over. The Ayuso party, for example, got more votes than all three left-wing parties. And also Vox increased its power in the parliament. All those incidents show that there are some things that need to be done. We see that in Austria, for example, we have the Popular Party prevailing. In Hungary since 1918, we have Viktor Orban, who has been for many years now Prime Minister, and in the elections of 2019, his party collected the 52% of the votes, having a very strict, discriminatory and anti-migration agenda. A lot of elections are expected in 2021. In Germany, for example, we are expecting the Greens to increase their percentages, and the xenophobic party of Germany might remain third party. That is not the case, unfortunately, for France with the elections of 2022, where the extreme right-wing party is flirting with power. So the local elections will not be immune by the general elections, and we also saw that even the European Parliament has been affected by the profiles of elections in the various European countries. It is rather clear, I dare say, that the European edifice, based on human rights and human dignity, and the principles of freedom and democracy, equality, and the rule of law is questioned. In 2021, the reasons that feed this ideology still resist. A new strategy should be introduced to protect people from racism. In September 2020, the Commission announced a rather ambitious action plan in order to introduce equality and fight discrimination and racism for the next years. At the same time, the fact that until today, a lot of refugees and migrants are faced with challenges concerning the labor market, education, etc. The Commission was led 2 months later to introduce an action plan for the next year for the integration of migrants and refugees in the host countries. The main problem remains asylum. What is the case? What are the developments? We all know that the negotiations did not advance regarding the asylum requirements. And we have the Visegrad team repeatedly being negative against refugees because of xenophobia. And on the other part, we have internal pressures exercised in various states. These catastrophic results are obvious in our country. Since May 2020, we had postponement of the asylum awarding, and we had a lot of incidents regarding refugees. A new approach now is considered as sine qua non. The Commission introduced a new plan on migration based on the acceleration of the asylum process, clearly as a result of the internal pressure of the xenophobic state, but by accelerating the process, there are some ideas that a speedy process might not be fair towards the asylum petitioners, and because the time won't be available for the examiner to check all the data. I am afraid from incidents already being communicated, I think that the process need be rearranged. The new agreement is to solve two issues: the processes at the border for those asking for international protection. If the first leads to the return of those who do not meet the criteria, the second pillar might also fail as well in connection to the asylum petitioners. The whole approach, nevertheless, shows that the European Union is weak to deal with thorny issues. Economic changes and political challenges, so that racism and migration will be thorny issues here and in the future. We see a turn towards a conservative model which risks the acquis communautaire, even though the Charter of Human Rights is binding for all member states. There are scarce indications that local legislations are scrutinized in order to see if the European legislation is transferred to national legislation. So I personally have not seen an inspiring plan concerning education and or the promotion of a culture of diversity in Europe. On the other hand, I do worry because if these steps are not taken, discrimination will continue existing. We all need to be vigilant. In the future, racism won't be expressed the same way as in the past. As a journalist says, the modern journalism will play in terms of marketing. And the mayor of Germany once said that the politics cannot assist. The problem lies in the heart of our society. We made mistakes in our education. We need to teach our students that in Germany we have a past that should not be repeated. A lot of people are not happy. And this means that they can be easily manipulated. Thank you very much. Vasiliki, thank you very much for your presentation. And now we will continue with Mr. Thanasis Dimakas, political scientist and a specialist in political analysis from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And he has participated in various conferences. He is active in the editions, and he is part of the editorial board, Kambun magazine. He will talk to us about Greece, Greek extreme right today.
Before I start with my presentation, let me say a big thank you to all of you for the invitation. I hope that this initiative will go on in the next coming years, that the agenda will be expanded and we'll have more and more people every year attending. So let me share my screen. Can you see it? Is it okay? Can you see the slideshow, please? Please confirm to the speaker. So as I said before, the topic of my presentation is the far right in Greece today. So it is linked with the thematic of our discussion in a very direct way, because the far right represents a threat against democratic institutions, democracy, and humanity as a whole. Practically speaking, what I will try to do is to map the current state of affairs, my research has been based on the comparison of the electoral results of the far-right countries in the last general elections, the local community ones, and the local government elections, and the European Parliament elections of 2019. What I tried to do is to provide facts, elements, and some insights of mine in order to build the puzzle, the comprehensive image, if you like, of far right. So I have three major questions that I will try to reply in my presentation. In order just to trigger this discussion, and these are the three main points. What is the ideological and political context of far-right parties? What is the current potential and dynamic, and what will the future of far-right be? When talking about far-right, there's always a confusion, some disagreement about it. There are different definitions about far-right. We know that they have racist, counter-immigrant, and nationalistic features. That's something we can find in traditional far-right parties. But we also have more modern theories that add elements to the far-right: nativism, populism, and authoritarianism. So we have the fourth wave of far-right. They have a kind of discourse which is counter-systemic. However, it is absolutely conventional. They go hand in hand with the system, and they have a very intense semantic, let's say, focus on the words. Let's talk about the practical stuff. In Greece, what we call far right, and that's my point of research, is what Ms. Georgiadou has identified. It's the right of the right. We're talking about the political rights on the right of Nea Demokratia in the political map. Of course, we're not talking about a single space. There's a lot of differences, we have splits. There is some branches of this big parties on the right of Nea Demokratia. There is feedback and a loop of people supporting this or that party. So when we started after the dictatorship, we have had Le Pen and other parties supporting the king, and now we have a conspiracy-based and national nationalistic and populist countries like Elliniki Lisi. We know more of these things. We used to have Laos, Ανεξάρτητοι Έλληνες, Χρυσή Αυγή, and Hellenic Solution. These are some of the parties. We have some smaller than them, but we will focus on these two big ones, the Golden Dawn and Elliniki Lisi, Hellenic Solution. In my research, I took down and analyzed the votes these parties received, mainly talking about Golden Dawn and Hellenic Solution, Elliniki Lisi. At the same time, we also have an analysis, comparative analysis, in order to see how the space of the far right moves in the course of time. I'm emphasizing mainly on the general elections and the European Parliament elections, because it's quite difficult to have a Panhellenic, a nationwide conclusion about just based on the elections for local government. I will provide you some details about that as well, but it's a bit dubious whether we can have a comprehensive conclusion based on the elections for local governments. I will give you the official results as presented by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, or Ministry of Interior, as it's called now. Now, we have the European elections of 2019. Top of the table from the space, we have, I'm talking about the space of the far right, we're talking about Golden Dawn, 275,000 votes, Elliniki Lisi, 236,000 votes. They each got one seat in the European Parliament. Then we have Laos with 70,000 votes, Ανεξάρτητοι Έλληνες 45,000, less than 1%. And we have another purely conspiracy-based party, the so-called Ellinos Synthesis, that had received 29,000 votes. So if we take that in total, we're talking about 650,000 voters in aggregate. This rings a bell, I think. We all have to listen to that, and we have to keep this for the future. Have to keep it not just for this presentation, but to keep a note of that for the remaining part of this discussion. Golden Dawn lost one seat. It remains the top party, and this seat went to Elliniki Lisi. So in this way, as we will see, there is a new way opened in order to change the predominant party of the far right. Let's see now the electoral trajectory of far right.
Από το 1984, όταν η ΕΠΕΝ είχε λάβει, είχε κερδίσει μία...
When ΕΠΕΝ won a seat for the European Parliament, there has been some kind of a freezing. The far right was not that dynamic. This changed back in 2004, after 1984, because in 2004, the Laikos Orthodoxos Συναγερμός won one seat in the European Parliament. So we see that in the 21st century, the far right is going up strong in the European Parliament. They have various political vehicles for that. And as you can see, we have Laos, Golden Dawn. They acquired some seats twice, Ανεξάρτητοι Έλληνες and Elliniki Lisi. What are the reasons of success of the far right in elections? There are many reasons. Let me stick to two of them, the most important ones for me. The first one is the nature of the elections themselves. In the international and Hellenic literature, these elections have been characterized as a second-tier electoral process, which means that people go to the ballot in a very loose way. There's many abstain, and they believe that this is a vote of complaint mainly. This means that we have a context that favors far-right parties. The second reason that complements the first one is that in the 21st century, especially in the last 2 decades of it, we see that there is a counter-immigrant, counter-refugee discourse that has prevailed. The far-right agenda has prevailed, so it's very easy for these parties to rely on that and get some electoral gains out of that. This is not the case just in Greece. It has to do with Europe, European far-right parties with their increased percentages. Actually, we have 2 governments currently in Hungary, in Poland, ruled, let's say, driven by the far right. Now, talking about the elections for the 2019 elections for the local governments, we have to pinpoint the following. Golden Dawn is the only party that presented electoral lists in 12 out of the 13 regional constituencies, and they had regional councillors elected in almost all of them. In total, they got a bit less of 200,000 votes, less than the general elections, that is. But there are some significant results, like the ones in Attica, approximately 90,000 votes, 35,000 votes in Central Macedonia, and there are other regions in which Golden Dawn had very good performance. Talking about municipal elections, that's a different framework, because in this case, Golden Dawn had a candidate mayor both in Athens and in Piraeus. That's not accidental. These are areas which, according to Mavris, even before Golden Dawn took off, electorally speaking, they had a course, they had kernels, let's say, of support there. And they had the so-called squadrons of attack, which were illegally acting, as we already know. Now, closing my remark about Athens, let me say the following, which we have to keep in mind. Athens has been characterized as the castle of Golden Dawn. Maybe if you remember, when Nikos Michaliakos was elected municipal council, he entered the venue using a Nazi way gesture, which made a symbolic gesture that also characterized the trajectory of Golden Dawn later on. In the last 2 elections for local government, Golden Dawn kept its forces, and it's not accidental that in both cases, Kassidiaris was voted 4th, going well beyond other candidates of historic parties, like the one of the Communist Party. As I said before, the 2019 general elections followed the 2 previous elections I mentioned. And this is the main part of my research. The most important electoral performance have been observed, as you can see on the slide, in the, let's say, change, the substitution between Golden Dawn and Hellenic solution. Hellenic solution, Likilisi, made it easy into the parliament. Golden Dawn, by hair, failed to go over the threshold. We also have Ανεξάρτητοι Έλληνες and Laikos Orthodox Συναγερμός. Both parties decided not to take part in the elections. We actually talk about both parties being self-dissolved because they have no future. Actually, they have disappeared. A few more details from the recent general elections of 2019. And here you can see the performance of the largest far-right parties in the last 2 electoral campaigns, general electoral campaigns. We're talking about what I would like to highlight is the difference in the total of votes, let's say, collected. Just 5,000 votes. which means, in other words, that far right remained intact from 2015 to 2019, despite the differences between these two parties, because on the one hand, Golden Dawn is a purely neo-Nazi party, and on the other hand, Elliniki Lisi is a conspiracy-like, friendly and nationalistic party. What we can see is that the core of the voters remained intact. Another thing we can see is that Hellenic Solution failed to absorb the Golden Dawn voters in total. They won, some of them, but Ανεξάρτητοι Έλληνες and Laos, as I said before, failed to participate in the elections. So they won something out of them as well. Moving on to the post-elections developments, which means going closer to the current date. The event that stands out is the so-called trial of the Golden Dawn and the sentence of the final sentence of this party. Of course, we have already seen that this party was being, let's say, dismantled bit by bit. Top members like Kasidiaris and Lagos have already been sentenced, and it was obvious that the time was clicking backwards for this party. So when we finally reach the date of the final sentence of the top leaders of the party, this has been a historical event, and it has been taken down in Greek history as one of the most important events. But as a result of this sentence, we have had some outcomes. But this is a question. Here lies a question. Nobody can still answer that. It's a dynamic phenomenon, of course, the evolution of a party, but we have to explore it. So the question is the following. Is the final sentencing of Golden Dawn, criminally speaking, does this also entail its social sentence? Before I give a reply to that, let's check what are the facts after the conviction, the criminal conviction of Golden Dawn. We see that many of the offices of Golden Dawn were closed. Let me remind you that Golden Dawn used to have 80 to 90 local organizations. Now they have no more than 2 or 3. They, of course, used to get the state aid. Of course, the fact that all convicted members have been deprived of their political rights means a lot. All these things, all this show that Golden Dawn is done, or it's about to be done, it's about to be exterminated or to disappear from the electoral map. But, as I said before, Golden Dawn is not the only party of this space. We have to take for granted that Golden Dawn is about to disappear. Hellenic Lisi seems to be frozen at the public polls, but there's another party, the party of Kasidiaris, with a very intense physical and online presence. That's a second bell that we have to ring. For instance, in the area of Nikia and Thessaloniki. In Nikia, we've seen there's a group of Kasidiari supporters doing billboard announcements and doing various stuff. And on the other hand, in Thessaloniki, there has been the initial gathering of the party and the march that activated his supporters in a way. Quite recently, we saw that this party got a 1.5 percentage of the virtual let's say support in a public survey carried out. Now, the pandemic. The pandemic was a global phenomenon, but let's see what the far right has done vis-a-vis the pandemic. So, far right, globally speaking, embraced the movement of the deniers, of the refuters. So let me remind you the words by Trump and others about the pandemic. In our country, far right, either via Velopoulos or by other smaller groups, supported these conspiracy theories and linked them with nationalistic theories of conspiracy. It might sound bizarre, might make us laugh, makes us feel surprised, but indeed there's people who believe that the New World Order want to take our lives away from us, the lizard people want to control the planet, etc. The serpent people, apologies. Of course, this is the context of the far right, where there is a wave of deniers developing in various areas. Maybe you remember those at schools that were against the self-test for kids, and the top of the cherry of the top was the march in Evasmos with hundreds of people marching against the counter-pandemic measures involving Alexander the Great and some other theories, creating this, what has been called ψεκασμένοι, freely translated, sprayed people, which is a purely Greek expression. Now, conclusions. I think it is worth making a review of them. So, far right in the 2019 general elections, which is the most recent case, retained an important electoral support, and this is also proven by the performance of both Golden Dawn and Hellenic Lisi in the general elections and the European Parliament elections. Of course, Golden Dawn is not anymore the dominating party. Hellenic Lisi manages to be represented in both parliaments, which is important for symbolic and financial reasons. And at the same time, Hellenic Solution, Hellenic Lisi, becomes the top party of the far right. So we have a so people of the far right go away from a purely Nazi party and moves towards a purely nationalistic one. Another point that we have to stress about the current state of affairs in the far right has to do with the name of the Northern Macedonia country. There was an expectation that far right would increase its power. It would bring people together on that basis. It seems that it won't happen. I think what the Nea Demokratia party did was very important, because initially they denied this name for the country and absorbed some voters. But of course, this was just a missed opportunity for the far right and all other far right supporters in order to get something out of that. So, in other words, far right did not reap benefits out of the national issue of the name of Skopje, which was to change the name of the country of Skopje to Northern Macedonia. As I said, elections for local governments provide certain, let's say, insights, but we don't get the full picture. However, we have to recognize that Golden Dawn had an important performance in the elections for local governments. Nationwide, they got a 2.5%, and Kasidiaris in Athens got a 10.5% of the votes, which corroborated that until 2019, Golden Dawn had a footing in the Greek society, because no other party has been registered in the past having such an important electoral performance in elections for local governments. So we have to say that in this respect, Golden Dawn has been the exception of the rule. People did not vote for far-right parties in the past. However, they did so because the Golden Dawn was able to bring people around to support them. After this party disappeared, we hope that these voters will go back, or to go to, for the first time, to something more democratic or progressive. As I said before, the far-right parties have a very strong electoral benefit out of Euroscepticism. They are the quasi-sole recipients of such voters, although we have far-left parties that are equally Eurosceptic. I'll provide you with some details following about the European Parliament elections, and you see how high far-right parties score in the European elections, 8–9%. Another bell that we have to ring and listen very carefully is the fact that the relationship of voters with far right is not something temporary. It's not something. It's something that it's a link. It's not something casual. They have a very strong link that has been there and keeps supporting far right. We're talking about some hundreds of thousands of voters who belong to the wider space of the far right. So, given also the fact that we have extreme groups or extreme or individuals within the Nea Demokratia, we have to understand that the number of supporters of the far right is quite bigger. But they are being, let's say, they are being covered by the biggest umbrella that's called Nea Demokratia. Let me go back to Ανεξάρτητοι Έλληνες and Laos. This phenomenon showed that there has been an oversupply of parties. Sorry for the term. Both parties used to coexist in coalition governments, and after that coalition, in the next electoral process, they vanished, which leads to the following conclusion. Far right is a space that's made mainly of parties for objections, expendable parties used for coalition governments. As I said, parties that took part in coalition governments, they vanished. So it seems that this space cannot handle many big parties that represent more than 3% of the electoral body. Now, a few thoughts about the future, some questions about the future, and my epilogue. We have to take certain facts into account. The area is now being dominated by someone else. Golden Dawn has been convicted as a criminal organization. We have the electoral failure of Golden Dawn and the split, and certain members have left. And we have an increasing tension with Turkey. So this is a very critical context, and it's very critical to understand and really interesting to see how far right will move in the future. What will be the road they will follow? For instance, two questions. Will the Greek far right follow the alt-right model, the alternative right, as it was the case, for instance, in the US with certain Trump supporters or in Germany? The second question, linked also to the thematic of this conference. Will the absorption of extreme people by powerful parties like Nea Demokratia decreases the threat against democratic institutions and human rights, or contrary to that, it's a bypass to bring racism, xenophobia back on the table? And bigotry back on the table. So whatever the route of far right will follow, we have to be alert, because as the Italian Hebrew author Primo Levi has said for the Holocaust, it happened once, but it may happen again. So it's up to us to prevent that. It's up to us to fight for something better, something more humane. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that we will have a fruitful discussion later on. Thank you very much, Thanasis. Let's now move on to Mrs. Triantafylia Kostopoulou, a psychologist. She has worked and lived in Germany for many years, so she knows in depth the issue of Greek-German relations. And she also knows the relation of Germans with the recent history. Please, before we move on to Triantafylia, allow me to say to both speakers that this conference, I have followed the entire conference, that their contributions were quite unique, and I'm really proud of them, both for Thanasis and Vasiliki. That's all I had to say. Really important contributions indeed. So let's give the floor now to Mrs. Triantafylia Kostopoulou. Today, she will emphasize on how the historic past is being perceived in Germany and what is the impact of the claim for the war reparations. Mrs. Kostopoulou, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the municipality of Distomo, the mayor, Mr. Satas, and of course, Malia Papaioannou, for her patience with me. In 2015, Aristotle University, there was an educational site with educational scenarios for the high school financed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. The site was under the title History from World War II and was approved by the then Ministry of Education. The ministry per se for the dissemination of the website took 20,000 euros from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany and the Hellenic German Fund for the Future. One of the aims of this website is to help students appreciate peace and the contribution of Germany after World War II. Reparations, recognition of culpability, etc. This perception of the post-war Germany prevails in all over the world, and Germany is a role model in dealing with the past. The way historic responsibility was dealt with in Germany is ideal as perceived, but was that the case as it is promoted by this educational website I mentioned earlier? How do you deal with historic responsibility when after the war you man the state with members of the Nazist party, when in 1950 in public offices we have more than ex-Nazis than in 1933 in high rank positions in the judicial, the health system, etc. When the ministries, even important for dealing with Nazist crimes like justice and foreign affairs, are manned with ex-SS and Nazis, when in 1955 you introduce Bundeswehr and the officers and sub-officers, all of them come from Wehrmacht, and in some cases from Waffen-SS. When you silence or omit with risk of elimination or crimes, when you introduce in 1958 the Central Service of Justice for the investigation of the crimes committed, and the director of this service is an ex-Nazi, what do you expect? This list can continue with a lot of other examples where I believe that dealing with the past in Germany is not a role model at all. I don't have the time to enumerate the MPs, ministers, assistant ministers, or heads of states we see in the post-war Germany, all members of the Socialist Party. I will talk about the chancellor and the presidency, the first coalition government after the war, 1969. The chancellor was an ex-Nazi, Kurt Kissinger, and 24 ministers, ex-members of the Socialist Party. Some of them were members of SA and SS. And even in the next government, 69 to 70, with Willy Brandt as chancellor, the ministers included in this government were 12 ex-socialists. 3 presidents were members of the Socialist Party. Walter Schell, 74 to 77, and Carsters from 79 to 84, who since 1933 was part of the attack squad. Two presidents were of paramount importance for Greece, Gustav Heinemann, 69 74, and his descendants. They were not members of the Nazi party, even though Heinemann was involved in the crime called obligatory labor since 1936, was a consultant of the then war factory and responsible for compulsory labor. In 1952, the then president had a shared, a common friend. This shared friend was Marx Verden, the man who slaughtered the Greeks of Saloniki. In Calabria, he said, I came here to maintain the memory of this event live in Germany. I feel ashamed in this area. Only those who accept their past can find their way to the future. Well, I won't make any comments on these words. How is it possible after 10, 20, 30 years after the end of World War II, to have in high-ranked posts members of the ex-Nazist party? One explanation is the Cold War. The former Nazis said that what they made them to become members of the National Socialist Party was anti-communism, and in the conscience of society, it was understood that post-war Germany was threatened by communists. Another explanation is that the process of the past was no more than just a motto. Most people were not involved with processing the past, but they wanted to just cross a line and close this chapter of history, just to put an end in the past. Responsibility for the crimes of nationalism back then was awarded to a small party of the wider party. In the families and in the public speech, the memory about the past and narratives focus on their own victims from the Allies, the poverty and famine, deportations of Germans who were sent away after the end of World War II. With the trial of Eichmann in 1961, the German population faced pictures of the Holocaust that had never been used neither in the Nuremberg trial. Then we had the Auschwitz trials in Frankfurt in 1963, and the trial against 10 members in Srebrenica in 1964 in Düsseldorf. During this period, one might observe a rise of awareness among the German society regarding the crimes which were committed against Jews during the Nazist regime and the lack of punishment. The trials actually promoted the revolt of the students later who wanted to distance themselves from the generation of their parents. The main role for the revolt of the students was the coalition government and the voting of the emergency laws. The new generation that is asking questions to their parents and mothers, to their fathers and mothers about Nazis, tries to understand and actually convicts and is faced 23 years after the end of the world, a government with chancellor of and ministers of Nazi and former Nazi without any opposition, since it is a coalition government with the participation of Social Democrats. It is faced with a government which votes for authoritarian laws, providing for the intervention of the army, even against internal revolts at the end of the 1960s and beginning of the 1970s. One can see in Germany a phase of non-involvement with the historical past or even an effort to forget it. From the first part of trying to understand and the prosecution of the Nazi regime at the beginning of 1960s, which was signaling an acceptance of responsibility, then Germany passes to the symbolic level, and we have Willy Brandt kneeling, accepting in a way the responsibility of Germans. From recent published papers, we see that the foundation of symbolic acts were introduced in order to replace the claims for reparations. In Germany, in history lessons, people, teachers are limited to certain historical events like the events in Poland, deportation of Germans from the East, the Holocaust, the end of World War II, and the rest is silenced. In a study carried out by the German parliament, and it was in 2018, it was declared the following: the World War II was an army event, is not important in the curriculum, and only some events are mentioned, like the Stalingrad battle and others that are not mentioned any longer. The Jews is mentioned as victims, but not alone. If there is a reference to other teams of victims, they are referred to occasionally, and they are clarified in only certain cases. Some groups of victims are not mentioned at all. Consequently, the German students learn nothing about the German occupation in Greece and the massacres, like the one in Distomo. The study concludes that the curricula as a whole for the period of nationalism give the impression of a criminal state without perpetrators, whereas the perpetrators or the organization of perpetrators, the crime organization are discussed rarely. The German population tends to forget or is described in curricula as just supporters. Knowledge about the crime against Jews in Europe and concentration camps in Auschwitz had as a result for many decades to have the outcome that Germans should be silent when Auschwitz was discussed. In 1959, the ministries of defense of foreign affairs of Fischer government talk about Auschwitz to justify the military participation of Germany in the imperialist Nazi war against Yugoslavia. The Minister of Foreign Affairs Chancellor Fischer said back then, without any shame, that Auschwitz is a border, but it is characterized by two principles: no more war, no more Auschwitz, no more genocide, no more fascism. These two things go together hand in hand, and we do remember of all this bombardment of Yugoslavia. So there is a new era. The Nazi past was overcome by the people. By mentioning Auschwitz, Germans felt an ethical superiority vis-à-vis the rest of the world. So they paved the way to memorize their own victims of World War II. Even though the mid-90s, we had indications of reconstruction of the German culture and the reformation of the society by a society of new fascists into a society of victims, but there were certain linked prevalence of a new Auschwitz made them feel comfortable. The mass media played an important role in the perception that Germans were mainly the victims of World War II. Back then, there was an explosion of shows with witnesses, some girls from the former association of girls or students or soldiers describing their suffer during the war, but they never mentioned their atrocities. Seeking of eyewitnesses was systematic. The most impressive witnesses were actually depicted in some shows like the women of Hitler, the children of Hitler, and were presented as authentic stories, conveying the impression that memories of a former man of a brigade have the same burden and dignity with the declarations of a historian. For example, in the same period, scientists talk about a collective drama, which included the nationalists. We describe these nationalists as mass murderers and war criminals. The identification of trauma was due because there was a need to describe the problems faced by the survivors of the Holocaust. As a consequence, in recent surveys, the interviewees consider their ancestors as victims of World War II, and the number of those who consider that in their family there were no perpetrators are two-thirds. Two-thirds of the interviewees say that their ancestors had helped victims. There are voices supporting that victimization of Germans in no way diminishes their crimes and does not alleviate the pain of the survivors and the victims. But this is the case. If everybody is victimized, nobody is a victim. And who can be the perpetrator when all of them are victims? One might say, what is she talking about? And they might say the way Germany dealt with its Nazi past, and they took responsibility publicly for the crimes committed by Germans during World War II. I will agree with most of your arguments, but today I would like to give you another point of view. I believe that it should be useful to know that the young Germans that come to Distomo and are visiting the museum are faced for the first time with this aspect of German history. In German families, when they talk about victims of World War II, they refer to Germans themselves. We need to know that their parents, grandparents, feel victims themselves, and so they have no understanding about the fair claims for war reparations for the victims of Distomo and elsewhere. I think that how differently Rado president would be faced in Calabria when it was known that he himself uh, had forgotten his Nazi past, introducing in 1952 a monument for the massacred Jews in Thessaloniki. And I wonder how seriously can Germans, presidents, ministers, MP, and ambassadors that we want to process together our shared history and conclude with a shared culture of memory. As I said earlier, the curricula in their schools do not provide for something that like that. Will they change that? How can we have a shared culture of memory? The Australian historian identifies the culture of memory as a means to keep nation alive and give people a shared past. This declaration creates a lot of questions for a Greek-German memory promised to be promoted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. Coming back to this website I mentioned earlier, I just wonder how the responsible for this program believe that the students will appreciate the contribution of Germany to peace after World War II. In any case, the burden lies to us. We have a long way ahead. Collective struggle against fascism and Nazism for justice and war reparations. Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστούμε και εμείς πολύ
We'd like to thank Mrs. Kostopoulou. And it was an honor to have you with us. And now we will continue with Alexandra Santa. And it is an honor for us to have you with us, being in the first conference organized for the victims of the massacre of Distomo. Alexandra Sanders is the daughter of Lucky Sanders, who her father, along with Manolis Glezos, took down the flag, the Nazi flag from Acropolis. Mrs. Sanda will talk to us about the people make choices. Choices make history. She is the National Counsel for Claim of German Debts. We're all ears.
Good afternoon, dear Mayor. Thank you very much for the invitation. Please ask the speaker to speak louder. So thank you for inviting me to this conference.
Κυρία Σάντα, αν μπορείτε να μιλάτε λίγο πιο δυνατά για να σας ακούμε καλύτερα.
Δεν ακούγομαι.
Ακούγεστε, απλά θα θέλαμε λίγο πιο δυνατά για να μπορούμε να σας ακούμε καλύτερα όλοι. Ακούγεστε λίγο χαμηλά.
Τώρα με ακούτε?
Ναι, τώρα είμαστε λίγο καλύτερα, ελπίζω.
Θα ήθελα να ξεκινήσω.
So, I would like to start by saying people make choices, and choices make history. Today, we are here to honor our dead. The victims massacred on June 10th, 1944. The massacre that was carried out by inhuman beings, and which we globally accept that it has been one of the the Nazi crimes against humanity. I think we have a slight issue with Mrs. Santa's connection.
Μπορεί κάποιος να επικοινωνήσει, να βοηθήσει την κυρία Σάντα με τη σύνδεσή της, γιατί βλέπω και εγώ κολλημένη την εικόνα της.
Ναι, προσπαθούμε. Μπορούμε να πάμε παρακάτω κάπου.
Παρακάτω, τελειώνει.
Να πάτε μήπως λίγο στον κύριο Δήμαρχο.
Βεβαίως.
Να πω λίγο
Γιάννη,
κάτι.
μας ακούς?
Ναι, να περιμένουμε λίγο μήπως καταφέρει και...
So let's wait a bit for Mrs. Santa's connection to be reestablished because it's the closing contribution. We'll try to communicate with her so we see what's going on. So until we reconnect, let's have a couple of questions.
Μπορούσα να απευθυνθώ λίγο εγώ προς το κλείσιμο, να κάνουμε την ανασκόπηση.
Let me now carry on the review of the conference. Are you okay with that? Mickey, you agree?
Λέω, ίσως να έκανα την ανασκόπηση του
Maybe it would be a good idea for me to start with a review of the conference while we wait for Mrs. Santa to reconnect. The last speaker says the closing act, let's say so. Yanis, would you like to start with a review? Yes, and we will have Mrs. Santa whenever she logs in again. So, you have the floor. Great. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone, all the guys and Triadafilya, of course. They gave a completely different, they painted a completely different picture of the conference. They added scientific discourse in this chat, and they added their own sentiments in it. Of course, I'd like to thank Triadafilya because she has given a fight, an important fight for this Greek-German phenomenon to be established. She's one of the people that stands critical to the behavior of the Germans against paying the reparations. We've been collaborating with her, and I'd like to thank her for her struggle. I'm also feeling really great seeing three young people from Distomo, you, Vasiliki, Thanasis, being here with us, because today you gave us a lot of courage, The young generation, I always believed in it, and I still do. The young generation is here to give us many, many things. Is here to take the relay and continue with this fight, because following also the analysis by Vasiliki and Thanasis, this is an ongoing struggle. Mrs. Sanda is back. Great.
Οπότε θα μπορέσουμε να συνεχίσουμε. Μας ακούτε?
Ναι.
Ωραία.
Τέλεια.
Ερχόμαστε... Great. So, back to you for your contribution. And then back to Yannis. The Second World War was not just a bloodshed war. It was the war of humanity to save human principles and ideas against Nazism, fascism, and militarism. So this memory of the war will remain one of the most important events, the most noteworthy events for the 20th century. That's an undoubted event because humanity made a choice. And as a result, humanity wrote history. Today, in the 21st century, we sadly observe that leaderships in many European countries, European Union itself, and the prevailing concept of power is placed beyond humans, above humans. As a result, wars have not ended, and we experienced the moving, the deportation, the evacuation of 70 million people to safe areas in order to save themselves from death. That's how we have the huge issue of the refugees, especially in Europe, which, depending on the consciousness and the respect to democracy by each people and country, it's being treated or handled. The options, the selection made by every government in every country displayed how history was written by this country. As a result of that, we had xenophobia and racism developed. 82 years after the outbreak of the Second World War and 80 years after Greece was occupied by the Nazis, the debt of the German occupators and the occupation loan has not been reimbursed, has not been claimed and demanded against the descendants of the country of Germany, of the Federal Republic of Germany, that is. And starting with the reply by the Federal Republic of Germany to our country against our last claim, which our last claim was passed by the Greek Parliament on July 17, 2019, with a huge majority. It was overvoted almost unanimously, and this shows the will of the Greek people for justice to be administered. The laconic reply that there is no such issue on behalf of the Federal Republic of Germany constitutes a shame for Germans themselves. Greece never waived its right for the reparations. Greece, since 1945 and 1947, has been claiming war reparations, the German debt, that is, following the Second World War. The claims of Greece remain legally valid, and they may be asked for. So, two European member states, equal member states, cannot. It's unthinkable that two European member states may have no proper dialogue, and well-intended one. This is the kind of feeling of justice that have to prevail between European countries. The legal system of Germany has already accepted that there is such an issue for Greece. Let me say that this behavior on behalf of the leadership of the Federal Republic of Germany is based on the fact doesn't take into account that Nazi surrendered unconditionally. We must never forget that. And after West Germany united with Eastern Germany, and as a result, we have the single German, the country of Germany. They are the descendants of the Third Reich, and they have to pay reparations because victims will not come back. For the crimes they have committed will not be forgotten. In fact, as we mentioned before, since these acts by the Nazi have been characterized as crimes against humanity, of course, we have to underline that we have German scholars, authors, intellectuals, actors, artists, and other people who help and try within the institutional role of theirs and through the official bodies of Germany, like the Bundestag, they try to bring to the surface the issue of the war reparations for Greece, as it is the case with AK Distomo or the German Solidarity Group. So these Germans, along with others, honor their humanity with a sense of ethos and democratic ideals. Especially the case of Distomo, we have to mention Yanis Stamoulis, never forgotten, the lawyer, a former prefecture of Viotia, who managed for the trial to be held in Italy for the reparations by the Italians. And as a result, the trial decided in favor of the families. And as a result, the struggle continues with Dr. Joachim Lau, who also honored us in this conference. Let me say a couple of words about the trial of Nuremberg, and I will explain you why I'm doing so. August 8th, 1945, in the London Convention, an announcement is made for the State Association of the International Military Court. The IMT, the International Military Tribunal, is made of judges coming from the US, Great Britain, France, and Soviet Union. Top members of the German military were put on the stand, and based on Article 6 of the constitutional map of the IMT, were accused for the following crimes: conspiracy to commit the claims to the counts 2 and 3, crimes against peace, defined as participation in planning and implementing aggressive attacks, violating various international treaties. War crimes, defined as violations of internationally agreed rules for the conduct of war, and crimes against humanity, mainly assassinations, slave enslavement, deportation, and other inhuman acts carried out against civilians before or during the war, or any persecution for racial or other reasons. These persecutions were carried out for racial or regional or religious reasons, and during this commitment of the crime, the tribunal has a jurisdiction despite the fact, regardless of the fact of whether the local laws have been violated. October 6, 1945, the Nuremberg trial starts, and in October 1st, 1946, the final resolution, the final ruling of the tribunal is being announced. So, following that, I'd like to stress that friends and allies, the Germans, who are considered methodical and disciplined as a people, I mean, how can it be possible not follow the rules, the terms that are included in every international treaty and violate the internationally agreed rules of war conduct and their obligations that stem following the end of the war, which, since their ancestors failed to comply with, they are the natural and legal hires. So for no matter how many years may pass, they will have the obligation to fulfill this obligation for those crimes against humanity, as it is stipulated in international conventions. The loser, the defeated party, that is the Third Reich, has to pay off and materially speaking, reparations, compensations, etc., as a sign of honesty and regret for the destruction of the state infrastructure and the 1,200 villages that have been burned to the ground, and the assassinations of numerous civilians, elderly, women, children, babies, the usurpation of Greek artistic artifacts, and the so-called occupation loan, because they emptied the National Bank of Greek's treasury back then, which means that this debt has to be paid with interest. However, in other words, this is a very important pending issue, a definitive one that has to be settled by democratic Germany, if they want to be characterized as such, and they have to do it immediately. On the other hand, we see that seemingly the European Union failed to learn the lesson, let alone what happened after the Second World War started. They have reduced to poverty most European states, and they have almost fully forgotten the social cohesion between its member states. Economy exists to the benefit of all people, so that all people may have their health care, the education needed for their children, their decency of receiving a paycheck, the 8-hour shift to work that has been conquered by blood 1 year ago. So they have their accommodation, their lodgement, and all these things are part of democracy. I'm not talking just in theory, I'm talking about practice. So in Greece, after 2010, we have had both challenges and threats to face. Fascism and neo-Nazism started to emerge. However, the historical decision of Greek justice for the conviction of Golden Dawn as a criminal organization has been characterized by all as a milestone for post-dictatorship Greece. But as it seems, it was also a milestone for Europe, because foreign press and mass media kept on disseminating this bit of news and talking about that. Of course, all Democrats in our country should not be complacent. They should stay alert, because the phenomenon of those let's say, bodies being developed is something that happened not only in Greece, but almost in all European countries. So we must never allow ourselves and our children to be threatened by fascism, Nazism, and these ideas. We, in the National Council for the German Debt towards Greece, remain focused on our target, which is which is none other but the administration of justice to the victims. Most of them are not alive anymore, and their families, and the justice made to Greece that suffered a lot. And as a result of those disasters, that distraction of the country, the growth of the country delayed, and because the reconstruction of the country needed huge funds that were not available. Of course, I'd like to mention that the Federal Republic of Germany should never forget that all European countries helped to rebuild West Germany after the war, giving their pardon in practice for the mistakes they have committed, that West Germany has committed, and helped in all means. For instance, loans that not paid back, including Greece, which so Germany currently was able to rise and now represent one of the strongest European Union member states. So from our council, we call the Greek government to swiftly implement the clear mandate by the Assembly of the Greek Parliament and remove all internal barriers in order to make justice to the victims, which is the Article 923 of the Common Penal Code, which is to abolish the judicial fee, the stamp that has to be paid for the claims by the victims to be filed. So a reply like that, there's no such issue, should be forgotten. It's a shame. There's one message from us to our friends Germans. Honor the consequences of the actions of your ancestors and pay your debt to Greece. The people that gave birth to Karl Marx, Goethe, Bach, Beethoven, and numerous other scientists, artists, philosophers, such a people should never forget their obligations. The National Council on the German debt to Greece would like to thank you for the invitation to take part in this really interesting conference about Distomo. Thank you very much.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κυρία
Thank you, Mrs. Santa. Yannis, the word to you.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, Αλεξάνδρα, γιατί έδωσες και με το...
Thank you very much, Alexandra, because by means of your contribution, your closing speech, and sharing what the council does, you are the follow-up to what your father and Manolis Glesos had done in the past. And we are the next generation. And we have the next generation, like Thanasis Dimakas, who was here since day one. There are many of us who try to support this cause. Thank you very much for being here with us, Alexandra, because you carry a very important name, the name of your father, and you're honoring it. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, John, you have the floor. Did you hear me, what I said before? I think Mrs. Sada wanted to say something to you. Mrs. Sada, do you want to say something? Please unmute yourself. Yes, I just did. I just wanted to say to Yannis that, and this is, I'd like to thank you all. And it's really happy coincidence to be here today, all of you. I'd like to give my greetings to Ms. Papaioannou. We have had a beautiful collaboration. I'd like to say to Triadafiliá Kostopoulou that her speech was amazing. Thank you very, very much, all of you.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε. Γιάννη, ερχόμαστε σε σένα.
Yannis, you have the word. So, on my behalf, before the review of the conference, I'd like to thank Amalia Papaioannou, together with Dimitra Dziri, Lukas Dimakas, Christos Papanikolaou, and Miltos Sfundouris, constituted the group, the team that worked to put this conference together, this online conference. We hope that next year we will have a physical conference. Last year, because of the pandemic, once again caught us by surprise, and we didn't know how to handle that. That's why we had a one-day event. Our objective since the beginning was to have a proper conference in Distomo, a conference open to Europe to discuss about rights, fascism, Nazism, memory, and the claim. We did it this year in this way. We hope that next year we will be able to have the event as we intend to host you, because it's one thing talking from a distance and remotely, and then one other thing being in the very place where those crimes were committed. Day one was a really interesting day with Lucas Dimakas being the moderator. We discussed about the crimes because we discussed about war crimes, the memory and the debt. We had also the Dean of the University of West Attica with us, together with Yorgos Panagiaris, Professor Yorgos Panagiaris, and together with Amalia, we tried to do something new in this Distomo, which is to be able and preserve the remains of the victims, because we we have a Holocaust, the only Holocaust where the bones of the dead are still here with us. So we have to highlight that. And following the conservation of the bones, we see that history is being rewritten for those who suffered that massacre. I think that Mr. Panagiaris gave us an amazing speech. I'd like to thank the University of West Attica, apologies, in order to, because there's an initiative to have a laboratory in this Distomo for the preservation of the bones. We also had Joachim Lau attending the day one of the conference. He is a lawyer in Florence, making his own fight, legal fight for the victims of this Distomo. And because, as it was mentioned, because of the Article 923 of the Greek Penal Code, no Greek government, no Greek Minister of Justice has ratified the ruling of the Supreme Court of 2002. We also had Lars Reisman, a member of the AK Distomo group, a team of activists from Hamburg, who for the past 20 years have been supporting our cause. We also had the Solidarity team from Berlin. We had Rolf Becker and Manfred Kingele. They both help together with Triadaphilia. They have been helping us a lot to bring in the surface the Nazi crimes in Greece and elsewhere. We also had a historian, a German historian and journalist, Greek-speaking Greek-educated Eberhard Rotholz. He lives in Greece and he has written many books about the Nazi crimes in Greece. Last but not least, we had Michalis Mitakidis, famous artist, member of the active member band, who wrote a song. The title was Εδώ το λένε Δίστομο. Εδώ είναι Δίστομο. This is Distomo in English. He really moved us last year because they presented the song live for the very first time last year in the empty theater of our mausoleum. It was something amazing, and we hope next year we will be able to have a live performance that will be also broadcast online. So that was the end of a very special day, day one, because we wanted to show that artists, activists, legal experts, scientists support us in this effort to keep the memory alive. Day two. Day two was dedicated to the issue of politics for the German war reparations to Greece. Fema Vragani, the famous journalist, the moderator, it was a very particular session because there was an intense political color. We had the regional governor of central Greece, Fanis Panos, because, as I said, it is the regional authorities that took the relay from the former, now debunked facture for the claim of Distomo. Currently, the claim is being handled, is being tried in Greece, following the Italian resolution. And we also have the will by the regional authorities to continue with this fight. The same is done. The main role is played by Fanis Panos, the regional government. We also had Athanasios Papadopoulos with us, mayor of Kalavrita, president of the network of martyred cities and villages. So it is people like Mr. Papadopoulos and other members of the network that have kept the fire alive in order not for the memory to be extinct, the memory of martyred cities and villages. This network is a spearhead in this effort. I'm really glad for Mr. Papadopoulos. I want to acclaim him, and it's very important that he gave back this 250,000 euros that the German embassy decided to provide them for the cultural center. He gave this money back because for him it was an insult that the previous mayor accepted them. We have to say that for Athanasius. Along, we had Marco De Paulis, the general military prosecutor on the Military Court of Appeal, who he has fought for that for many years. He also pursued the crimes against Italians by the Nazi. He has given many interviews. He has taken interviews by the perpetrators and many of the survivors. It was an honor for us to have him with us. We also had Heike Hensel, member of the German Bundestag, member of the Die Linke party. It was back in November 2019 when together we were able to host a conference in the Bundestag organized by Die Linke and some members of the Green Party and the Social Democrats. So we see that the topic, the issue was kept alive also within the context of the German Parliament, the discussion about the war operations. That was really important in our cause, in our struggle. And Die Linke mainly is at the forefront. We also had Miltiadis Fontouris with us, member of the Association of the Relatives of the Distomo Massacre victims. He helped a lot with Amalia and Dimitra and Luca and Christos to put this conference together as it's today. Hopefully, once again, we will have a live conference, a physical conference next year. Day 3 was a bit different. It was more about history and symbolism. The reason for that was that we had participations by a member of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum, the head of it. We also had the director of the Museum of Sant'Anna. They have a museum like ours there. And we also have a representative, of the Lidice Memorial, because on the same day, June 10th, 1944, they had their own Holocaust in Lidice in the Czech Republic. We also had Yorgos Margaritis, Professor Margaritis, along with Michalis Liberatos, historian and PhD holder. They discussed about the historical events that took place. Both Professor Margaritis and Mr. Liberatos talked about that, on how Nazism rose and the anti-communism that was very intense back then, as Triadaflia also pointed. So we had the director of the Lidice Memorial. He discussed also the issue of the trial of Nuremberg. He presented the way they tried to bring the massacre on the surface. It was a very strong experience for us. We also had the director of the National Park of Peace and the Museum of Sant'Anna di Distomo, a small city which back in 2019, summer 2019, I had the honor of attending the memorial service. They hold every year, the same thing we do here. They're doing a great job in Sant'Anna. It was a Holocaust like the one of Distomo. And of course, Germans there made crimes like the ones they committed in Distomo. They killed children, babies, women. They behaved the same way they behaved in Distomo. So we have many common points with them. And as also I said before, we had the head of the diplomacy of the head of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Museum, and she discussed about how the memorial and the museum is organized. And something that really struck me was that there was a significant rise in the number of visitors. Before the pandemic, they almost had 2.5 million visitors to visit the place. Because this is the only way to keep the memory alive. And ending, I'd like to say a big thanks to Amalia, to Lucas, Dimakas, Mr. Papanikolaou, Christos. They gave a fight for the Distomo Museum, even under the pandemic, the circumstances set by the pandemic, because in the beginning we had 500 or 1,000 visitors to the museum, and before the pandemic we had a dynamic to reach 50,000 visitors in the 2019-2020 period. We're talking about a huge number, and this was thanks to this team. I'd like to thank them for their contribution for this conference and for we're about to upgrade the museum in a few years. So that's all for me. Thank you. I hope next year we will be all together, healthy, to honor our dead and renew our promise for this fight we give. And this fight, wherever we stand, in the factory, in the cafeteria, or in our job, or we write articles, it's an ongoing struggle, an ongoing fight, because we must never forget that history, the fight for history, it never stops. Nazism is still here lurking. That's all for me. Thank you very, very much. And hopefully see you all next year in person. That's all we all hope. That's my wish as well. So we can all meet in our place and honor our dead. Yannis, let me say that tomorrow, for the first time, we'll have the path of salvation. We will start from the square at 6:30 p.m. In real time, we will walk towards Agios Mamas, which was the point of evacuation for many Distomo residents. It was the only place Germans failed to cover. As a result, many people left from there and were able to hide. Tomorrow we'll have the first crossing of the pathway of salvation, freely translated. If there's someone listening right now, you are most welcome. Of course, we'll take all necessary health precautions to honor our dead and the people who survived. Okay, if someone may follow, they're most welcome. I'd like to thank all the attendants. Thank you very much once again, wholeheartedly, for the invitation for this conference. And I hope next year we will all be there for the same purpose. Thank you very much, Nikki, that 3 young people from originating from Distomo, 3 young scientists fight for the same cause. They are here present, and thanks to their contributions, they gave us hope for the future and for what we have to keep on fighting for. Thank you very much. Have a great night.